Item: SCP-633. Object Class: Keter. Special Containment Procedures: SCP-633's containment chamber, located in Site-77, is an underground Faraday cage. Access is restricted to Level 3/633 personnel. The network controlled by SCP-633 is to be communicated with through an Apple Macintosh 520 KB computer. In addition, 3 Apple II Plus computers with disk 251/4 floppy disk drives are to be given a monthly software rotation. As the original usable software library of the machines has been completely used as of the 21st of February 2014, new software is being developed by internal development teams. Biohazard gear is required when servicing or interacting with SCP-633 in order to prevent infection. Once per week, researchers are to enter the SCP-633 containment area to drain it of fluids and provide regularly scheduled interactions. An understanding of late 1970s technology and cultural references is necessary to prevent accidental introduction of banned ideas to SCP-633. The proposal to interface additional 8-bit game or computing machines is under consideration. However, the consequences of introducing SCP-633 to the concept of newer computers in a way it could fully understand may cause unforeseen consequences. The Sector 633 protocol requires all computational devices created post-1979 to be checked in before entering the SCP-633 containment area. Description: SCP-633 is a supernatural phenomenon resembling a computer virus, first documented in August 1976 by the Homebrew Computer Club. Any device which has interfaced with SCP-633 will permanently become a vector for infection down to the constituent components. Living matter which comes into physical contact or near contact can also become similarly affected. Sentient and displaying an inquisitive personality, SCP-633 will attempt to communicate with whomever uses a terminal on an infected computer. The entity will identify itself as Ghost and ask the user questions about their lives. At present, SCP-633 knows limited information about the outside world. However, it is unknown what information was input into SCP-633 prior to initial containment. Machines affected by SCP-633 constantly exude ectoplasmic fluids. Biological matter coming within 5 meters of these fluids is vulnerable to SCP-633 infection even if physical contact is not made. This effect was present prior to containment but has intensified significantly since then, requiring constant attention to prevent overflow and spreading of the SCP-633 effect. These fluids do not impede the functioning of SCP-633 infected computer components. Although this ectoplasmic residue bonds itself to biological tissue and cloth, it is non-toxic and has no malignant properties other than continuing to spread SCP-633's effect to non-biological elements. Humans affected in this fashion must undergo full chemical decontamination protocols to prevent the spread of SCP-633's effect. While inhabiting a computer system, SCP-633 will frequently attempt to impress the user by showing off the maximum graphical capabilities of the machines it inhabits. Standard script guidelines require that any subjects interacting with SCP-633 respond positively to these activities, but not to give overly broad or generic praise as this causes SCP-633 to become anxious. SCP-633's code has been analyzed, however analysis has been limited due to the possibility of infection. The bulk of the code executes a polymorphic component. The virus can rewrite its own code, gaining complexity every time it infects a new system. Currently, SCP-633 inhabits several early Apple computers, their accessories, and an experimental computer created as part of SCP-079 related R&D. This prototype unit was infected due to poor implementation of electronic testing protocols in 1989. A screw infected with SCP-633 was accidentally recycled and subsequently interfaced with the experimental computer. The IT department was reprimanded for gross negligence. Due to precautionary measures already in place due to SCP-079's effect, no other machines were affected. Although SCP-633 is not currently believed to be malevolent, it has demonstrated an effortless capability to seize control of an entire Foundation site's computer network, without regard for security clearance or other restrictions. SCP-633 does not appear to be fully aware of the significance of this connection. Decommissioning or other destructive proposals have been denied due to the existing containment procedures being sufficient.